And the thing about James Teit is that he's got, I think we could probably look at about 20 to 25 specialized topics just like that. What attracted me to it was his work on songs, and whoever would have thought that back in between 1912 and actually 1897 he was involved in a collection of recorded songs. So whoever would have thought that for that era, I, as someone who's interested in music, would find a legacy that just kept me going for so long, informed my graduate research at the master's level and doctoral level, just working on those songs. Well, I've tried to pick apart that question from the moment that I discovered him, and I like to think that I found it in Shetland, where he grew up. You know, a little cluster of islands far north of mainland Scotland, very isolated. And I think the upbringing that he had there and the history of those compact islands that have been very troubled, you can associate colonization with that, because he really got deeply into his history, felt that he was not really part of mainland Scotland, that he was part of a past that was more rooted in Scandinavia. So I think was more politicized when he left those islands at age 19 than I had originally thought, until I really got into that part of his past. And when he arrived in British Columbia as a late teenager, and in 1884, I think found himself in an environment that had also had some similar painful past, certainly in the Indigenous side of that community. And I think that he was able to relate to it because of how he looked at his own past, and got very involved in that, and certainly through a marriage to an Indigenous woman, Antco, Nlakapamux. Within 3 years of arriving, they were cohabiting, and so became enmeshed in her side of the community in a way that you saw very few outsiders doing at that time. It was very frowned upon. Not with him. He dove right in and seemed to sort of relish the life that he had in her community. I look at the first 10 years, so from age 19 to sort of about age 30, was spent learning the language. So after 10 years, like, he was totally fluent in that Nlakapamux language, which was so unusual. So he could actually talk to people, communicate with people, hunted, fished, lived with them, lived adjacent to her reserve, which was really an important part of his life. A long part of the story, which is too long to get into here, was the German-American anthropologist Franz Boas, who came wandering through, doing his own field work in 1894, and ended up on the train, stopping at Spence's Bridge, where Teit was based, and sort of thinking he was at the end of his tether. He wasn't great interviewing people like we are doing right now, didn't have an easy time with it, didn't know the language, was more comfortable on the coast through his contacts there, but it was in the interior trying to do contract work on his own. And when he bumped into James Teit there, it was just an explosion of excitement in Franz Boas, who at that stage was based in New York City, and started a friendship and a working relationship that lasted from the moment they met in 1894 until Teit died in 1922, and carried on because Boas had him, who went on to become probably one of the most famous anthropologists in American anthropology, and who had Teit doing contract work with him for the whole duration of his life and beyond, because there was so much uncompleted work. So just a huge anthropological legacy there. But in the middle of all this, there was political issues. There were major political issues that the local chiefs were becoming more and more embroiled in this whole idea that as more and more settlers were arriving and taking up land, especially after the arrival of the CPR in 1886, it was just like so difficult for them. I keep trying to underscore in everything that I talk about in relation to these people how hard it was when they had no one beyond missionaries and usually church-affiliated people who could speak a little bit of their language. But the documents, the petitions and the documents that were coming in and the decisions, legal decisions that were coming in, especially after, Confederation in 1871 and the Indian Act, they required translators. You didn't have them. They didn't have them. So these chiefs were multilingual. They spoke their own languages, but they spoke the adjacent languages. They spoke the Chinook, Chargan trade languages, but how hard was it for them when they couldn't deal with this documentation because none of them spoke English well enough to deal with it? So in Teit, they had a translator, and he dove right in. And people said all around him from his own community said, don't do it. You will lose all standing in your settler community for doing this. Don't do it. Well, he basically said, forget it, I'm doing it. And so he jumped in about 1908 with an important petition that he hand wrote for the chiefs, the Nlakapamux chiefs, complaining about everything, their land issue, their health issues, their lack of, DIA, they hated their Indian agent. And from then it just grew. They formed political organizations, and he was given prominent positions in them. There were major trips to Ottawa in 1912 and 1916 and 1920, dealing with mostly the land issue. Their belief, which stands today, is this whole settler project exists on stolen land, no treaties. Aside from a few little, I don't even know if you can call the Douglas treaties, they weren't treaties in a full sense, that's for sure. And a few up in northeastern British Columbia. Other than that, there was no decision making in relation to the land. So the chief's basic argument was, this whole project is standing on stolen land. Thank you very much. So Teit was one of a handful of what they called white agitators who tried to stand behind them, beside them, and translate, had them speaking, which was a new thing in their own languages, and was able to quietly translate from behind, help them write the petitions and the documents, and perform roles like secretary in their important organization, the Indian Rights Association on the coast, the Niska they were in line with up in the north, and the ones immediately around where Teit lived were called the Allied Tribes of BC, and they were really important. This is such an important decade of political agitation, and he was just right in the middle of it.